relationships change the course of our lives, but can they change history? I'm the Affair Archivist, and this month's affair to remember is that between Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Lucy Mercer. Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt are one of the most famous couples in American history, but they lived separate lives for the majority of their marriage. It was this separation that paved the way for them to become one of the most influential couples in history and defined what a president and a first lady should be for the modern era. Franklin and Eleanor were opposites, with Franklin being the gregarious, attention-seeking extrovert, Eleanor the private, deep-thinking introvert. He was doted on by his mother and convinced he could do anything in the world that he wanted. She was devoted to her alcoholic father and his false promises, and orphaned by the age of 9. Their firstborn child, Anna, would later say, "You couldn't find two such different people as mother and father." Their differences would eventually drive a wedge between them, and their paths would diverge, forever changing American history. It all started when Franklin had an affair with Eleanor's secretary. Eleanor and Franklin met as children when Eleanor visited Hyde Park in 1886. They were fifth cousins, once removed, and both part of the illustrious Roosevelt clan. They would encounter each other over the years, but officially started their courtship around 1902. The couple were engaged in 1903, yet were delayed in marrying by Franklin's mother, Sarah, who insisted they wait a year to be sure that they truly wanted to get married. This wouldn't be the last time Sarah would impose her rules on the couple. Franklin and Eleanor married on St. Patrick's Day in 1905. They set their wedding date to ensure that Eleanor's uncle, Theodore Roosevelt, could attend and give her away. He was a bit busy at the time, given that he was President of the United States. The young Eleanor was very different from the trailblazing woman she eventually became. She was deeply insecure and kept to herself in these years, and harbored early insecurities about her marriage, going even so far as to say, "I shall never be able to hold him. He is so attractive." By 1914, Franklin and Eleanor had 3 children. At first, Eleanor stayed at home to raise them, but found being a full-time mom was not only unfulfilling, but something she couldn't quite manage. Given that her parents died when she was so young, and that she was raised in a cold environment by her grandparents in which she never smiled, it isn't surprising that Eleanor struggled with motherhood. The rise of FDR's political career would also coincide with the outbreak of World War I, and Eleanor busied herself with arranging social gatherings to help further her husband's ambitions and connections. In 1914, Eleanor hired a social secretary to help her manage all of her responsibilities. This decision changed the trajectory of her marriage and her life as a whole. The woman Eleanor hired as her social secretary was Lucy Mercer. Lucy was from Washington, D.C., born to a prominent Catholic family that had fallen on hard times, or better put, spent all their money partying too hard. Coincidentally, her father, Carroll Mercer, was a Rough Rider alongside TR during the Spanish-American War. Lucy's parents divorced when she was 12 years old. Though they had lost much of their money, the Mercers still maintained some social status. Her mother worked as a decorator for many prominent families, and Lucy and her sister still made their debuts in society. Lucy would eventually make good on this social capital by securing a position working for Eleanor, which was the catalyst to her affair with FDR. Lucy was known for her beauty and charm. She had dark hair and blue eyes, and was a statuesque 5'9". People described her as having a voice of dark velvet. FDR was immediately smitten with the young beauty, always tipping his hat to her and referring to her as the lovely Lucy. Even Sarah, who was notoriously difficult to please, liked Lucy. Lucy recollected that she and the future president were inexorably drawn to each other. When they met, Lucy was 23 years old, Franklin 32. At the time, Franklin was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and Eleanor had to do her part in schmoozing with other government officials. Eleanor had a growing family on top of that, so she needed someone to help her organize her busy schedule. Lucy helped arrange Eleanor's social events and write correspondence. Soon enough, she was arranging clandestine meetings with Eleanor's husband as well. The affair started officially in 1916. Eleanor had given birth to 6 children within a decade and did not want to have any more babies. Due to the taboos of the time, she felt her only option for birth control was abstinence. Elliot Roosevelt, the couple's oldest son, noted that after the birth of their final child, my parents never again lived as husband and wife. That summer, Franklin stopped coming along to the family's vacation home on Campobello Island, opting to stay in Washington, D.C. with Lucy. This aroused suspicions in Eleanor, and her letters imploring Franklin to join the family in Campobello increased in urgency. However, Franklin would only visit for a day or two at a time. He preferred to spend his summer vacation with Lucy, partying it up on naval ships with other Washington insiders. The following summer of 1917, Eleanor acted on her suspicions and fired Lucy. Lucy would find herself on the unemployment line just as the United States was entering World War I. Yet, mysteriously, before Lucy even had time to check the wanted ads, she got another job, with the Navy, as a secretary, in the same office in which Franklin worked. What a startling coincidence. That summer, like the previous one, Lucy and FDR saw each other often, but were even more brazen with their affair. They went to more yacht parties, visited historical sites like the Yorktown battlefield, and dined together at friends' houses and out in public. One of the friends they dined with was Alice Roosevelt, Teddy's daughter and Eleanor's first cousin. Alice encouraged Franklin's entanglement with Lucy, saying he deserved a good time. He was married to Eleanor. Yikes. Lucy even had a decoy boyfriend that would come to parties with her and Franklin. Her fake boyfriend was Nigel Law, who worked for the British Embassy. He would later say that he didn't mind pretending to date Lucy because he liked FDR so much and wanted to do him a solid. The gossip papers even published, or planted, depending on who you ask, a story about Nigel and Lucy's engagement. Yet, somehow they never got around to getting married. Historians are unsure as to whether or not Lucy and Franklin consummated their affair. According to the text, FDR and Lucy, Lovers and Friends by Resa Willis, a motel sign-in sheet from 1918, bears the names of both of them, signed in as a married couple. So, you do the math. Things got a whole lot messier when Franklin returned from Europe after a trip with the Navy in 1918. He was gravely ill with pneumonia, too sick to stash away his love letters from Lucy. This resulted in Eleanor finding them in his suitcase. Eleanor basically did the 19-teens equivalent to reading Franklin's texts. That's why they say, never put anything in writing. Eleanor confronted Franklin once he was well again and offered him a divorce. She was clearly feeling the sting of yet again being rejected and betrayed by those who were supposed to love her. Yet, her mother-in-law wasn't having it. Divorcing in 1918 would have put an end to Franklin's political career and brought scandal onto the family. Sarah threatened to cut Franklin off from his inheritance if he left Eleanor. Considering she bankrolled the family's entire lifestyle, including tuition for the kids' schooling, travel, you name it, Franklin decided not to get a divorce. So, the couple stayed together, and Franklin promised to never speak to Lucy again, a promise he would not keep. Lucy and FDR would cool it for a few years, and Lucy moved to South Carolina and became a governess to Winthrop Winty Rutherford's 6 children. Winty was 32 years Lucy's senior. His wife had died a few years prior, and he needed help raising his young children. Winty was a member of the Stuyvesant family and was quite the playboy in his youth. He was old, he was a widower, and he was filthy rich. Sounds like the perfect man to me. Lucy was in her late 20s by that time, nearly an old maid, and felt that Winty needed her help raising his family. So, in 1920, the two made it official. They had a happy marriage and had one daughter together in 1922. Eleanor was deeply impacted by Franklin's betrayal. She was always insecure about her place in his life, and the affair confirmed to her that he would never fully love her the way she needed to be loved. Eleanor later wrote, "The bottom dropped out of my own particular world, and I faced myself, my surroundings, my world, honestly for the first time." Historians believe that Lucy and Franklin resumed their correspondence shortly after the future president was afflicted with polio in 1921. The two would exchange letters back and forth for years, and Lucy attended all 4 of FDR's presidential inaugurations. Franklin arranged for a presidential limo to pick her up and made sure she was out of Eleanor's line of vision. Once FDR was president, Lucy requested numerous favors on behalf of friends and family. FDR arranged for some of them to get assignments in the military during World War II. When her young nephew died of leukemia, she asked FDR to help arrange his burial next to her father in Arlington National Cemetery, which he did. After Winty suffered a stroke, FDR helped him get care at Walter Reed Hospital in Washington. It was clear that though their affair ended long ago, FDR still harbored feelings for Lucy. In 1941, a new name appeared on FDR's itinerary. No, he didn't find a new lady to flirt with, though he had several other groupies by this point. This was a code name for Lucy, and she would make many visits under this assumed name during the war years. To set up these meetings, FDR needed someone trustworthy to arrange them, so he asked his daughter, messed up by now. Eleanor had confided in Anna about the affair many years before. Anna knew how much it had shattered her mother's sense of confidence and peace. However, she gave in to the pressure from her father and invited Lucy to the White House numerous times. Conveniently, Mrs. Johnson would only visit when Mrs. Roosevelt was in Campobello on vacation, or in New York on business, or in England on a goodwill tour. By 1944, Winty was dead, and the Allies were making major strides in the fight against Hitler. Lucy was with FDR during the D-Day landings, and they celebrated the liberation of France together later that summer. They would sometimes take car rides together to Maryland or Virginia when FDR needed a break from his immense responsibilities as a wartime president. This was a common practice for him, with several other women he flirted with too. In April of 1945, Lucy arranged for her friend Elizabeth Shimatoff to paint a portrait of Franklin. They traveled to Warm Springs, Georgia for this purpose. FDR established a foundation and treatment center for those with polio at Warm Springs several years prior. During his presidency, he often traveled to Warm Springs when he needed rest and rejuvenation. By 1945, he was suffering from congestive heart failure and his hands trembled. Shimatoff was struck by how weathered and sick FDR looked. In the Little White House, FDR sat for his portrait on April 12, 1945. The president complained of an awful pain in his head and slumped over. He died around 3:30 that afternoon of a cerebral hemorrhage. Before FDR's body was cold, Lucy and Shimatoff left Warm Springs to conceal that Lucy was with the president at the time of his death. The portrait was unfinished. Lucy's presence didn't stay secret for long. She was with FDR in mixed company. Franklin's eccentric cousin, Laura, spilled the beans to Eleanor when she arrived in Warm Springs, and she also revealed that this was not an isolated incident. Eleanor also learned of her daughter's role in setting up these meetings. Eleanor was stoic and didn't react when Laura in her big mouth revealed all of this information. Later, she confronted Anna, who defended herself, stating that her father needed Lucy to deal with the stressors of seeing the nation through yet another major crisis, and that people were always around when the two were together. Perhaps Anna was trying to win her father's approval. FDR was often absent when his children were young, due to his political duties and later his illness and recovery. Following Franklin's death, Eleanor sent Lucy a painting of FDR that Shimatoff had completed previously in 1943. Lucy wrote a fawning response in thanks to Eleanor, stating, "I can't tell you how deeply I feel for you and how constantly I think of your sorrow." Eleanor never replied. Lucy was hell-bent on the affair remaining a secret. She burned all of FDR's letters, and she would get her wish because she died of leukemia in 1948. However, the affair would become public knowledge in the 1960s after one of FDR's aides wrote a memoir. Now, the affair is remembered as a turning point in the Roosevelts' marriage and a turning point for Eleanor's personal and public evolution. Though they remained together, the affair effectively ended the romantic aspect of Eleanor and Franklin's marriage. She and FDR lived separate lives and mainly spent time together for the sake of publicity and for his presidential campaigns. Their son James would recollect. After that, father and mother had an armed truce that endured to the day he died, despite several occasions I was to observe in which he in one way or the other held out his arms to mother, and she flatly refused to enter his embrace. Eleanor learned a fundamental life lesson from her husband's betrayal, that she could only rely on herself for her own personal fulfillment, and that's what she spent the rest of her life doing. Like her husband, Eleanor thrived on doing good for others, and rather than dwelling on Franklin's transgressions, she became an activist and often lobbied her husband on behalf of the causes she cared about. She worked tirelessly to secure rights for people of color, women, and the impoverished. She would later go on to be a delegate in the UN and work for world peace following World War II. Eleanor invented the modern First Lady. Before Eleanor, First Ladies were seen and not heard. Post-Eleanor, every First Lady has taken up at least one cause to advocate for during her husband's presidency. Talk about turning lemons into lemonade. In many ways, we're lucky that Franklin prioritized his inheritance and political career over love, because if he hadn't, it's a little scary to think about how the U.S. would have made it through the Depression and World War II. Though he decided not to marry Lucy, feelings lingered between them, and the final unfinished portrait of FDR serves as a poignant symbol of their affair. Perhaps FDR and Lucy were star-crossed lovers, and their romance remains an unfinished portrait too, a testament to what could have been. Some historians believe FDR rekindled his connection to Lucy as a reminder of who he used to be. Before his polio diagnosis, before his agonizing recovery, before he took on the responsibilities of a nation in crisis. Either way, it was clear that Lucy filled a void within him that even Eleanor admitted she could not. He might have been happier with a wife who was completely uncritical. That I was never able to be, and he had to find it in other people. Thank you very much for watching. I'm the Affair Archivist. Join me next month as we examine yet another affair from history.